A merchant named Aulus was moving the ancient equivalent of millions of dollars a year selling fermented fish sauce out of a coastal Italian town. He did not own the boats. He did not catch the fish. He just figured out how to brand a cheap commodity so well that buyers paid triple for his specific jars. That was 75 AD. The trick never stopped working. Here is what most Roman Empire videos completely miss. They focus on the emperors, the legions, the Colosseum drama. But underneath all of that spectacle was an economy powered by thousands of working-class tradesmen, freedmen, and hustlers running taverns, import routes, and small manufacturing workshops. The backbone of Rome was not conquest. It was commerce. And the guys doing it looked a lot more like Randy from the warehouse than Julius Caesar. Trick number 1 is private labeling, and Aulus Umbricius Scaurus is the textbook case. Garum, the fermented fish sauce he sold, was everywhere in the Roman world. Every port town made it. But Aulus stamped his name on the jars, maintained a consistent recipe, and marketed his version as premium. Archaeologists have found his branded amphorae scattered across the Mediterranean. He did not invent the product. He owned the name on it. Today we call this private labeling, and people are doing the exact same thing, flipping generic goods under their own brand. Trick number 2 is rental arbitrage. Romans understood this concept roughly 2,000 years before anyone coined the term. Savvy operators called insularii would lease an entire apartment building, called an insula, from a wealthy landlord for one flat annual fee. Then they would turn around and sublet the individual cramped rooms to working Romans on daily or weekly terms at a serious markup. They carried the least risk, yes. But the spread between what they paid the landlord and what they collected from a dozen tenants was where the real money lived. Trick number 3 is the maritime loan, and this one is genuinely fascinating. A Roman merchant could borrow cash specifically to fund a trade voyage. He would use the money to buy goods, sail to a distant port, sell everything, then repay the loan plus interest and keep the profit. Here is the part that made it work. If the ship sank, the debt was canceled. The lender absorbed the catastrophic loss. This was the ancient version of venture capital risk sharing, and it allowed guys with no starting capital to fund real trade expeditions. Trick number 4 is the societas, which is essentially the ancient LLC. Everyday Romans pooled money to fund trade expeditions or bid on government contracts. One guy had the contacts. Another had the cart and the mule. A third had the cash. Together they could take on a job none of them could touch alone. The societas model shows up as early as 200 BC during the Republic. Splitting risk and splitting profit among a small trusted group is not a modern startup idea. It is one of the oldest income structures in recorded history. Trick number 5 is arbitrage, and the Pax Romana, roughly 14 AD to 180 AD, was the golden age for it. Safe roads and cleared sea lanes meant a merchant with a card in Gaul, what is now France, could reliably source goods from Egypt and sell them at a premium in Britain. The price gap between regions was enormous. Olive oil that cost almost nothing near the groves of North Africa sold for multiples of that price in colder northern provinces where it could not be grown. The guy who understood both markets and could move between them was the guy who got rich. Trick number 6 is passive income through lending, and the Roman poet Juvenal wrote about it in detail. He described generating 20,000 sesterces in annual interest, which a January 2026 analysis by Live Science calculated at roughly $200,000 in modern passive income per year. Romans who accumulated any capital did not let it sit idle. They lent it aggressively at interest to merchants, builders, and farmers. Idle cash was considered wasteful. The money was always supposed to be working somewhere. Trick number 7 is hard asset hoarding during inflation, and this one becomes critically relevant around 200 AD when the Roman Empire started debasing its currency. They were essentially printing money by reducing the silver content in coins. Smart merchants saw what was happening and stopped holding cash. They shifted into real estate, agricultural tools, and precious metals. Things that held value when the currency did not. The principle is not complicated. When the money itself becomes unreliable, you move your wealth into something that cannot be inflated away. Trick number 8 is the franchise model, and Romans were running it long before anyone put a name on it. You could buy bread from a no-name baker on any corner. Or you could buy bread stamped with a specific bakery's seal, a maker's mark that guaranteed consistent quality. Merchants used these marks across dozens of product categories: pottery, wine, oil, metalwork. Buyers paid a premium for the mark because the mark meant they knew what they were getting. The premium was not for the product. It was for the predictability. That is still exactly how brand loyalty works today. Trick number 9 is counterfeit detection, and this one is pure street-level hustle intelligence. Roman merchants did not just look at coins. They weighed them. Every coin had a standard size-to-weight ratio, and merchants carried small pocket scales to check that ratio on the spot. A coin that looked right but weighed slightly less had been clipped, shaved down at the edges by someone skimming metal. Catching that before you accepted payment was the difference between making money and losing it. They did not have apps. They had resourcefulness and a good scale. Trick number 10 is the urine tax, and yes, this is a real story. Emperor Vespasian placed a tax on urine collected from public toilets, which was then sold to fullers, the laundry workers who used the ammonia content to clean and whiten wool togas. When his son Titus complained the whole arrangement was disgusting, Vespasian held up a gold coin and said pecunia non olet, money does not stink. The actual hustle lesson here is not about urine. It is about recognizing value in a waste stream that everyone else is ignoring. Trash to cash thinking is as old as Rome. Trick number 11 is geographic price intelligence, which is just knowing what something costs in two different places at the same time. Roman merchants who traveled the trade routes kept mental or written records of price differentials between cities. A merchant who knew that purple dye cost 40 sesterces entire but sold for 400 in Rome was sitting on a 10-to-1 margin. That knowledge was the asset, not the dye itself. The guys who got wealthy were not the ones working hardest. They were the ones who had better information than the people they were selling to. Trick number 12 is volume buying for resale. Roman merchants who supplied the military were masters of this. The Roman legions needed enormous quantities of grain, leather, iron, and timber on a predictable schedule. A merchant who could guarantee bulk delivery on time could negotiate a fixed contract price, then go out and source the goods cheaper in the open market and pocket the spread. This is not complicated. It is the same logic behind every wholesale to retail flip that has ever worked. Lock in the buyer first, then go find the supply. Trick number 13 is subletting skills, not just property. Freedmen, former slaves who had been released and given limited rights, built entire income streams by hiring out their specialized labor on a contract basis. A freedman trained as a skilled metal worker might work 3 days a week for his former master as part of a legal obligation, then spend the other 4 days taking paid jobs from other clients. He was essentially freelancing inside a constraint system. The constraint did not stop the hustle. It just shaped the edges of it. Trick number 14 is the tavern as a cash flow hub. Thermopolia, the Roman equivalent of a fast food counter, were everywhere in cities like Pompeii. Archaeologists have identified at least 150 of them in Pompeii alone. The owner of a thermopolium was not just selling hot food. They were running a neighborhood information exchange. Merchants met there. Deals were made there. The person who owned the counter had first access to every piece of commercial gossip that passed through the neighborhood. The food was the product. The network was the real asset. Trick number 15 is commodity storage and timing. Roman grain merchants understood that price is not fixed. It moves with supply and season. A merchant who could afford to store grain through the summer harvest glut, when prices were low, and hold it until the winter shortage, when prices spiked, could double or triple his money without moving a single additional pound of product. The storage facility was the investment. The patience was the skill. This is the oldest version of buy low, hold, sell high, and it required no market knowledge beyond knowing how seasons work. Trick number 16 is word-of-mouth reputation as a credit system. Romans did not have credit scores. What they had was something called fides, a concept that blended trustworthiness, reliability, and personal honor into a single social currency. A merchant known for fides could access loans, partnerships, and contracts that were simply unavailable to someone without it. Your reputation was your balance sheet. Destroying it was financial suicide. Building it was the single most valuable long-term investment a working Roman could make, and it cost nothing except consistent behavior over time. Trick number 17 is the agent model. Wealthy Romans who did not want to be seen doing trade, because it was considered beneath their social class, used agents called insiders to conduct business on their behalf. The insider ran the shop, negotiated the deals, and handled the cash. The wealthy patron provided the capital and took the majority of the profit. The insider took a cut and gained experience and connections. This is essentially the same structure as a silent partner arrangement or a franchise operator agreement. The money and the labor were separated by design. Trick number 18 is barter networks as a hedge against currency instability. When the Roman currency started collapsing in the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, merchants in outlying provinces did not wait for the emperor to fix it. They reverted to direct barter and commodity exchange. A farmer might pay a blacksmith in grain. The blacksmith might pay a tanner in iron goods. These local barter loops insulated small merchants from the chaos happening at the imperial level. When the official system breaks, the people with real goods and real skills find each other and keep moving. Trick number 19 is the coin hoard as a savings vehicle. Just yesterday, on July 1st, 2026, archaeologists in France announced the discovery of a massive 1,800-year-old jar of Roman coins. And while the headlines treated it as buried treasure, historians note that smart Romans hated idle cash. The people who buried coins were usually doing it during a specific crisis, a war, a plague, an invasion, planning to come back for it. The real lesson is not the burial. It is that they were accumulating hard currency at all, converting income into portable, durable, non-perishable stored value. Trick number 20 is the one that ties all of them together: diversification across income streams. The Roman merchants who survived the longest, through currency collapses, political upheaval, and trade disruptions, were almost never dependent on a single income source. They might own a share of a trade ship, sublet 2 rooms in a property they leased, lend money at interest, and run a small workshop on the side. Each stream was modest. Together, they were resilient. No single disruption could wipe them out completely. Old hustle, new money. The logic has not changed in 2,000 years. Here is what strikes me every time I dig into something like this. These were not geniuses. They were not emperors or philosophers. They were working people operating inside a system that was not designed to make them wealthy, and they found the angles anyway. Private labeling, rental arbitrage, risk-sharing loans, barter networks, reputation as credit, diversified income streams. None of these tricks required a degree. None of them required permission. They required observation, patience, and the willingness to move when everyone else was standing still. Your grandparents already solved this problem. We just stopped listening. If one of these 20 tricks sparked something for you, drop it in the comments. Tell me which one you are actually going to test this month. Not someday. This month. I read every comment on this channel, and I respond to most of them. If you want more videos exactly like this one, digging up the income strategies that working people used before the 9-to-5 became the only story anyone tells, hit subscribe. There is a lot more buried out there. We are just getting started.